What on earth is Mesopotamia? You might hear it all the time in all these history and Anunnaki videos online, but is it a place, a race, a kingdom, a religion? Too long didn't watch. It's a geographical region that gave birth to our modern civilization and became the transition point in history where cavemen turned into civilized man. This is the entire history of Mesopotamia in a nutshell. Mesopotamia means the land between the rivers, referring to the Tigris and Euphrates rivers that surround the region. Around 10,000 BC, a bunch of wandering nomads like the Natufian people noticed, hey, this crescent is pretty fertile and would be great for growing stuff. So they decided to start growing plants and raising animals here, the agricultural revolution. They quickly realized that growing plants and raising animals in a controlled environment is much easier than roaming the world to hunt and gather, like they've been doing since the beginning of time. Hunting got replaced with raising livestock and gathering with planting crops like wheat. They even dug their own smaller rivers from the main river to make the first irrigation systems and grow plants even faster, and set up the first permanent settlements with farming communities such as the Ubaid, Halaf, and Samara in the region. Everyone had the same job, be a farmer. And a bunch of these smaller settlements lived alongside each other for a couple thousand years. Then around 4000 BC, one group got really good at this whole agriculture thing, producing the first significant food surplus in human history, which meant they made more food than they needed, so not everyone had to be a farmer anymore. And some people could do other stuff, like keep track of all that new food or sell it to other people, as well as develop writing systems, math, law, governing, housing, religion, and the wheel. Meaning they'd need even more people to manage everything and keep all this in check, which in turn requires more food. This positive feedback loop is how society starts and is why Mesopotamia is called the cradle of civilization. These really good farmers called their settlements Sumer, and hence were the Sumerians, who needed cities to house their growing population, starting with Eridu, then Uruk and Ur, which they ruled over for 1500 years. In 2300 BC, a nearby settlement called the Akkadians took notice and thought to themselves, hey, these Sumerians are really good farmers and it seems to be working out pretty well for them. Instead of competing with them in farming, let's pour all of our efforts into training our people how to fight so that we can take over them and they'll do the farming for us. So they came in with a stronger army and did just that. Took over Sumer under the rule of Sargon of Akkad, the land of the Akkadians. This is the moment humanity realized, oh shit, we kind of need a military if we want to maintain control over our land in the long run. The Akkadians established trade routes with new emerging empires like the Egyptians and the Indus Valley civilization to make friends. Eventually Sargon died. The next ruler wasn't as good at ruling as him, which led to the fall of the short-lived Akkadian empire after only about 50 years. The Sumerians briefly took back over the land around 2000 BC, only to be taken over by a few other settlements, which ended with the Assyrians. To think, all this fighting because the Sumerians were better farmers. Then in 1780 BC, a new king named Hammurabi conquered the land in the name of his empire, Babylon. Like the victors before him, he had a superior military and great negotiation techniques. Developed the Code of Hammurabi, the first written law system that he carved into this 7-foot statue. He died in 1750 BC and Babylon fell with him, and we slowly started realizing the importance of teaching successors how to lead. Assyria took over again and managed to rule for another 1,000 years, keeping the area growing because they started collecting taxes. They kept their military strong and would deport people who got too smart to other areas in their kingdom to prevent smart people from grouping together and forming rebellions. Around 625 BC, the Assyrians fell from the combined efforts of the remaining Babylonians, Egyptians, and other smaller city-states. Babylon takes over again to form the Neo-Babylonian Empire under their new king Nebuchadnezzar, which shortly fell after he died. Guess they didn't learn from the Assyrians. A series of wars for power broke out, only to be won by the Persians, a new up-and-coming group of Iranian-speaking tribes, with their first king Cyrus the Great taking over in 550 BC, who was so great that he took over the surrounding areas of Mesopotamia and beyond, creating the Great Persian Empire. These guys lasted so long because they finally figured out how to train new kings. So when Cyrus died, the leaders who followed were just as good, and were one of the only empires in the region to successfully, albeit briefly, take over Egypt. The Persians too, like the Assyrians, spent a lot of time growing their military, with such leagues as the Persian Immortals, a battalion of 10,000 elite warriors that no one dared fuck with. And they were going off, with their king Xerxes going up against a new city-state, Sparta, rising in Greece, which is the plot of the movie 300, although it's not historically accurate. But the Greeks actually ended up winning in the end. That started a conquest led by Alexander the Great, who conquered Persia in 333 BC under the rule of the Macedonian Empire of the Greeks, ruling for 200 years under the Greeks until 146 BC when it was taken over by the nomadic Parthians and then the good old Romans in 115 AD. Turns out the Persians weren't done yet. They just called themselves the Sassanids to form the Sasanian or the Neo-Persian Empire in 224 AD, which got overthrown by the Rashidun Caliphate, the first Islamic state in 650 AD, followed by many other military measuring contests over the next millennium, from the Turks to the Mongols, the Ottoman Empire, and a few in between, and eventually formed the modern nations of Iran, Iraq, and the surrounding countries we have there today in the 1900s. All this because a group of people made a bit too much food 6,000 years ago.